Hey folks, Randy Newberg here. We are recording another episode of the Hunt Talk Radio podcast, or as some people know it as Randy Newberg Unfiltered. And today, I'm not going to have to be unfiltered very much because my guest is one of my most, how would I say it? The guy I probably respect as much as anybody in the elk hunting world. Probably the Pied Piper of the elk hunting world if you're into elk-calling, which I'm really poor at. So whenever a guy like Corey Jacobsen offers to even say hi to me, or like he did this year, he came hunting with me, I sit up and I pay attention. Those of you who don't know Cory, which I'm sure all of you do, he is the, I don't know, what is it, Cory? 5-time, 7-time, 8-time world elk-calling champion. I mean,
numbers are not relevant.
Okay,
so.
He's so modest. I mean, they don't give Super Bowl rings for elk-calling championships, or Cory's fingers would look like, you know, Charles Haley or something. But Cory is not only one of my dear friends, he's one of the best elk hunters I know. Certainly the best elk caller I've ever hunted with. And he's the owner of elk101.com. He used to be the owner of Extreme Elk magazine.
Extreme Elk, yep.
And you are the owner of a lot of things. When I say that, what I mean by that is if you knew how much knowledge Cory owns in his head, and we'll get into this in the podcast. he elk hunting and elk calling comes intuitive to some people. I'm not one of them, but to Cory, it must come really easy. So, with that, Corey Jacobsen, thanks for being here from Boise, Idaho.
Well, thank you for having me, and I'm going to need a few minutes here to get the red out of my face from that incredibly humbling introduction, but thank you.
No, it's well-deserved. Cory and I are sitting at the Mirage Hotel in Las Vegas, Nevada, and you guys are probably thinking, what in the heck are they doing in Vegas? Well, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation Elk Camp is this week, and Cory and I are always at Elk Camp. I did a seminar today called Finding Elk on Public Land. To kill one, you got to find one. Tomorrow, Cory's going to defend his elk calling championship. And are you doing some seminars while you're here?
No seminars.
No seminars?
No seminars.
Holy cow, your voice won't be... My voice is already shot.
Isn't it crazy how just 1 hour of talking on a stage over the PA system and everything there, your voice just... Yeah. It's gone.
Yeah, they had some bullhorn there today. There's a rodeo going on, like
right in the middle of all the exhibitors. There's a full rodeo arena set up.
Yeah, which is cool if you're a rodeo guy, but if you're the dude doing the seminar and every time they blow that horn, everyone jumps out of their seat right in the middle of your sentence, you're like, did I just say something? So, any of you who do seminars, the biggest fear when you're giving a presentation like that is that you look out in the audience and half of them are nodding off.
Yeah.
It's like, oh gosh, I hope nobody's falling asleep.
And for me, that fear comes from the half that are awake that are actually listening to me. If I see 3/4 of them nodding off, I get much more comfortable.
Yeah, then you can say anything you want. And when I sense that, okay, they turned up the heat in the room and it's tough to stay awake, I kind of throw a zinger out there just to see if anyone's paying attention. Or I'll tell a joke about myself or a joke about someone in my family or whatever, and you get through that. But anyhow, that's why we are in Vegas right now. Cory came to Montana this year, and finally we were able to connect our schedules on an archery elk hunt. And we were going to do this podcast when you were up in Montana elk hunting. But Cory's I shouldn't say he's the pickiest guy, but we were just
you blame me for this, but I actually blame you because of all the grouse we ended up getting sidetracked chasing. And we could have done like 4 episodes of a podcast just in one day of what we spent chasing grouse. So
you're probably right.
I know you're going to blame me for dragging the hunt out to the very end, but
yeah, I was going to. But you're right. So people, and someday I'm going to do a grouse episode, and you're going to see why Randy Newberg still has a lot of that Big Falls, Minnesota upbringing in him. Because when I see a grouse, things get kind of crazy. And Cory can attest to that.
I love grouse hunting during elk season, and I have shot plenty of grouse. We pulled up to the very first end of the trail road, got out, and there were 3 grouse there.
It was like nirvana.
Oh, if you've ever seen a young hunting bird dog go crazy with his tail wagging, his nose going different directions, and running in circles, imagine that bird dog with a bow in his hand.
And that was Randy Newberg.
That was Randy Newberg.
The truck barely even rolled to a stop. I mean, you couldn't go any further because there's a gate on the Forest Service road, and there was a grouse on the other side of the gate. I locked them up, slid it in there sideways, and Cory's looking at me like, what's going on?
And he was at full draw before his feet hit the ground.
But I got him.
You got him, and we had grouse for dinner.
Yeah, and I tell you what, there was another big blue grouse. He jumped up on this dead log. What was it, 34 yards away or something? And I saw you drawing a bead on him, and I'm like, well, just center punch him. And Cory's taking his time, and all of a sudden, whoop, and he took the thing's head off at 30-some yards. I look at the camera guy. I'm like, did you see what I just saw? But Cory walks over there like, oh, yeah, I do this all the time.
I thought you said 44 or 24. I was aiming for his body.
But we had more fun in 5 or 6 whatever days of elk hunting. It was a blast. We were hunting the public lands south of where I live in Bozeman, and yeah, the elk numbers aren't what they used to be there. They're still okay. But when you have the Charlie Daniels of the elk bugle with you, you don't need that many elk. And I think in 5 days, we called in, 7 bulls within?
I think 6.
6?
We heard 6 elk bugle, and I think we got inside bow range of all of them.
Yeah, and that was impressive to me. And I in my show, there's a reason you guys don't see me do a lot of elk calling on my show, because I suck at it. I'm like as marginal of an elk caller as you're ever going to hear.
Now you want to talk about modesty and humility. Randy is the last to point out, but I'll be the first to point out, he called in just about every one of those elk. I was out front as the shooter. He kept saying, go set up, you shoot, and very graciously put me out front as he stayed behind and did the calling. So regardless of Pied Piper status or whatever nicknames he comes up with, he is the one who is behind the scenes calling in the elk.
Yeah, and the other thing that you don't see, though, folks, in this episode that's going to air is I'm looking at Cory, and he's giving me this command for a cow call, this command for an aggressive bugle, this command for a not aggressive bugle. So, anyone can make a noise on a flute, but knowing what to say and when to say it is the hard part. And I'll just tell you, if Cory wasn't telling me, hey, beat on that tree with a stick for a while, or cow call, or scream, or whatever, I'd have been out there. I would have scared most of them away. So I appreciate that Cory wants to give me credit for some of that, but it's definitely undeserved. But it was a ton of fun. I learned so much, and I've told a lot of people since then, is when you hunt like I do, I've always, even in archery season, I've kind of been this trying to be silent, get in close, let them tell me where they're at and what they're doing, and hopefully an encounter happens. 1 out of 8 times maybe an encounter happens. And we park at the first trailhead. Cory breaks out the bugle, and he's walking over to the edge of the clear cut like, hey, boys, I'm here, and there's going to be some serious butt thumping going on. I mean, and maybe I'm reading that wrong, Cory, but you're pretty aggressive in your elk calling. It seemed anyhow.
No, and it is. And that's, it may be a downfall. I've had a lot of people, my dad including, say you ran past 20 elk today, but I got to the one that was ready to participate. So yeah, I definitely cream an area when I go into it. And by that, I mean, I take the one that's ready and I'm looking for that specific elk. And so I am aggressive. If an elk's not ready to play, I'll walk right by him and come back another day. But from the second I step out of the truck, it's all business with a bugle tube.
It certainly is. And it just struck me because I'm like this passive guy. And I'll get a bugle 200 yards away, 300 yards away. And then it's like, okay, now what do I do with it? It doesn't sound like a hunter. What do I do here? Is this the real deal? What's going on? And as quick as Cory would hear a bugle, we were on the march. We were this, we were that. And after the third or fourth day, I'd be like, Cory, what'd you just tell that guy? He's mad. Cory'd look at me and say, I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I hope you don't ask me to explain what I said because I don't know, but
it works.
Sometimes.
And one of the things I observed, and I like to use fishing analogies a lot of times when I compare my elk hunting. And when I go fishing, and I'm a lake reservoir walleye fisherman, I will go, and if I see fish on my depth finder, my graph, my fish finder, and they don't bite within about 5 minutes, I say, heck with that, they're carp, and I move on. And I keep doing that until, kind of like you said, I find the fish that want to bite. Yep. I'm not going to waste my time on fish that don't want to bite.
Totally.
It just doesn't seem like the thing to do.
Yep. Now, if I was there and I had to fill a tag and I was not confident that there were a lot of elk somewhere or in my calling abilities or whatever, I may focus more time on trying to get in, pattern that elk, set up a tree stand, find a water hole, whatever it is, hunting that elk. But I'm like the basketball team that lives and dies by the 3-point shot. Yeah. And calling is my 3-point shot. And if it's not working that day, it's not working that day. I've got to find a bull that can be called in. And so if that means covering 10, 12, 14 miles a day to find one bull that's fired up and bugling, that's my strategy. And it's probably, desperation, laziness, however you want to look at it. But it's, there's not a whole lot of skill there. It's just run and gun until you find the one.
When he says 10, 12, 14 mile days, I'm here to tell you folks, it's 10, 12, 14 mile days. If those of you who have not stood next to Cory, he's all legs. He's like a piece of piano wire. And when he takes off up the ridge, it's just a glimmering dot ahead of you. And you're like, hey, dude, I'm 51 years old. I drive a desk for a living. Hey, just calm down here. It's not like this bull's going to run away from us. But no, for me, it was such an eye-opening experience about how to be aggressive with elk hunting. And I
think there, when we talk about aggression, it's really important to distinguish between carelessness and aggression. They're two completely different things.
Right. And that was a point I wanted to get to is I'm always very cautious of the wind, whether I'm rifle hunting or whether I'm archery hunting, whatever. But you take the wind to a level like nobody I've ever hunted with. And there were times we'd hear a bull that I'm thinking, oh, he just over the ridge 150 yards. And we're making a big loop 3/4 of a mile.
Yeah, that first night, the first bull.
Yeah.
That bull bugled straight below us, the wind going downhill. He was maybe 300, 400 yards below us. Right. We bugled, gave him a location, and then we boogied across the mountain. We hiked, 3/4 of a mile over, right, and then came back in across from him a right, little lower, and he had come up to that location we had bugled from. Had we stayed there, he would have winded us within 30 seconds.
Right.
But yeah, we had to get clear around him, let that clear out, and then come in below him, and it worked.
In that morning when we went down in that hole where all the grizzly bears hang out, I was worried about, and we thought it had to be like Big Hank.
Monster bull.
I mean, this was the most nasty, ornery sounding bull we heard in the whole week of hunting. And I'm thinking, man, he's just like 100 yards ahead of us in the huckleberry bushes. And all of a sudden I look and Cory's walking away from him. And we make a big loop, and now we're close again. And we keep doing this. And I see him using his wind checker every minute. And it's almost to your point of aggression versus carelessness.
Yep.
You are as aggressive your combination of cautious and aggressive was, to me, very striking.
And I push it as hard as I possibly can, knowing what I can and can't get away with. And that's, we mess up way more than we're successful, but you can't fool the wind.
Yeah.
You cannot win when an elk's got your wind.
Yeah. And I think elk hunters have a tendency to underestimate the nose of an elk. Everyone says a whitetail has this amazing nose, and they do.
Yep.
But an elk, how many times do we hear an elk or we see an elk and we're sure he's coming in and then nothing?
Goes quiet.
It's not that he saw you. He smelled you.
Yep.
And he's like, I know what that is. And how an 800-pound animal can walk through the blowdown without making a noise, both coming in and leaving you, it's still a mystery to me, but it happens.
It happens.
A lot.
Every day.
Yeah. And so to continue one little bit about that next morning, when we thought we had Big Hank, it took us, 3 hours?
It was about 11 o'clock before we actually got into a setup that the wind was good. We had shooting lanes. We had an area that he was going to be comfortable coming in. And Lauren and I moved ahead and were able to pull him in. Randy did the calling and the raking and pulled him in. But yeah, it took 3 hours to find that right setup.
And we didn't even move a mile in that 3 hours.
Sure. It was a couple miles back out of there, it felt like.
Well, maybe we did. I don't know. But
no, it was cat and mouse through that basin, and we were never more than 300 yards from that bull.
Right.
But we couldn't break him loose.
And when I hear this thing decide he's going to come a little closer and he's letting it rip, I'm like, boy, this is the big one. We're going to have our work cut out packing this one out of here. I never got to see the bull. But you said it was just a little 5 point.
A little 5 point, yep. It surprised me when I saw him coming. I thought, well, this has to be the satellite bull sneaking in, and the big bull's going to be right behind it. And sure enough, he bugled right there in front of us, and it was him.
Yeah. Anyhow, for a guy who's hunted elk like I have for 25, I don't know, years, that week that we spent in late September was really, and I would encourage anybody who's an elk hunter to go find someone who probably hunts in a style that's foreign to them. Because for me, that was it just, and I'm sure some of my buddies are tired of me talking about it, but I'm like, that was a very perspective changing, whatever you want to call it. It was one of those hunts, and just being able to observe someone who tries and experiments in ways that I would never do. How different the elk respond. And I think a lot of elk hunters, and maybe you'd know better than I do, Cory, it seems like a lot of elk hunters think, well, I'll go blow on my call, and if he calls, I'll call him in from 500 yards.
Yeah.
That might happen on some private exclusive estate, but it doesn't happen very often on the public land elk you and I hunt.
Not very often.
And I've noticed when you hear a bugle, you are closing the distance in a hurry. I mean, that seems to be your next step is
totally.
Heard a bugle, I got to get as close as possible.
Locate the elk, and then, and it's that balance of how close can I get without bumping him and pushing him out. And it's a fine line there. If you're 250 yards from him, it might not be enough to put the pressure on him to get him to come in. But at the same time, if you forge ahead 30 or 40 yards, you might be putting yourself in a position where now he's got the advantage and he's not going to come in. And
yeah,
so it's a balancing point. They're trying to find that. But yeah, getting close for me, for calling, especially aggressive calling, you get close and it's your chances of getting that bull in your lap escalate greatly.
Yeah. So I also noticed that you bugle a lot more than most guys I know, and you cow call a lot less. And you were telling me a story one year that some guy left a note on your truck that said you bugle too much.
Yeah, so that's, I don't know. I assume he meant that as a derogatory statement. I take it as a compliment, but yeah, I would say 80 to 90% of my calling is bugling, and the cow calls are simply to get the bull to make a noise.
Yeah.
But from there, my communication to that bull is always through a bugle.
Yeah. So somewhere in your life, you were probably not as aggressive, or you didn't use bugling as much as you do now, maybe? Or since you started, have you just been, I love the sound of a bugle, and if he's not going to bugle, I don't want to hunt him?
So my dad was an outfitter growing up. So September, he was gone. So my mom, the burden of taking me elk hunting landed on my mom. And she would drive me out and sit there sometimes and let me just wander around through the woods trying to figure this elk hunting thing out.
Wow, what a great playground.
It was. I mean, I was so fortunate growing up. We lived in elk country. So it was 10 minutes from our house. I could be bugling at elk. And so as a sixth grader, however old you are when you're 12, to be able to just go home after school and go hunting every night in September was pretty special.
Very special.
But I can remember, I think I was probably a freshman in high school and went hunting, didn't hear a single bugle that night, and came back, and as I was coming out, there's a man up there waiting for me. And I came up and he said, you've ruined hunting in this area. And I'm, a 14-year-old kid. I'm like, what are you talking about? And he said, you bugled every 3 minutes. And he's like, there were more bugles from in this canyon from you tonight than there will be in this canyon all season. And so I realized at that point I had a problem. But the way I looked at it was, well, if nothing answered me, I don't know if there's a reason to come back here for the rest of the season. So it doesn't matter if I ruined it or not.
Yeah.
There's no elk here. I'm going somewhere else. And so from the time I was little, I overblew the bugle.
Okay.
But
So
the difference is that somewhere along the line, I learned what to say and to make it more effective.
And when to say it?
And when to say it.
Do you think the timing of when you reply is as important as how you reply?
I think it's a combination of both, but at the same time, I think it's neither. I don't know. There's a lot of theories out there on elk language, on what this sound means or that sound means.
Right.
I'm a pretty simple person. Most people would probably think not very intelligent, and so I have to dummy things way down so that I can understand it and have a chance. I look at it as elk respond off of emotion, not language. And so it's not necessarily what you say specifically as far as, hey, what did that sound actually mean? It's more the emotion that you put into it. And if you bugle and do the regular just scale bugle that goes up and comes down and it's like, well, that sounded good, that's great. But when I bugle, I want people to know, man, veins are popping out on his forehead. He's really putting some effort into that. And the elk can tell that same emotion. So it's not so much the timing, the language, as much as if a bull's in close and I cow call to him and he responds while he's still responding, I want to scream at him with emotion because that's telling him, you just did something that made me really mad.
Yeah.
And I want to fight about it. And outside of that, I don't know what's going through his mind other than his eyes roll back in his head and he comes running in and his senses are down. And now I have at least somewhat of a chance, being an aggressive, sometimes careless hunter, to have a chance at this elk. And so, it's, I think that I pieced it together through a lot of error.
Yeah. So it's not like elk sit there and make these classic bugles like they're reciting Shakespeare in the world of elk. They respond to things like, I'm mad, dude. Let's throw down here. I'm coming in.
Totally.
It's just that response. It's an instinctive, natural response where he says, I've had enough. I'm coming in.
Yep.
And
what that does for me, you mentioned it's important. Find somebody that hunts a different style than you do and hunt from them. There's so much value in that because I consider myself still, after 30 years of elk hunting, a novice student of this game.
Yeah.
And anything I can glean from somebody else's experience that is different, additive, alternative, anything like that, anything I can add to my arsenal is only going to make me a better hunter. On that day when elk aren't calling or they aren't responding to emotion or whatever it is, I've got more tricks that I can pull out and try to improve that success. So it's not like the way I hunt is the right way. It's not like it works every time, but being simplistic like I am, I can't handle a script. I can't handle, trying to say, okay, what sound did he make? I need to make this sound.
Right.
I want it to be simple, and this is probably the most efficient.
And that's just come through a lot of trial and error.
Totally.
Okay. So
a lot of error, mostly.
So the guy who grew up in Idaho like you did with elk in your backyard certainly has a head start over the guy who grew up, say, in my home where I grew up in Minnesota, who doesn't have any elk to experiment with.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's, there are things you can learn, and that's important.
Right.
But there are still things you have to experience to be able to put that learning into action. And, some of us are quicker learners. It took me 10 years of elk hunting to kill my first elk.
All you were trying it all with a bow, or was it?
All with a bow. Well, okay. Yeah. Even during rifle season, sometimes, any weapon season, I was stubborn enough that I thought I could kill one with a bow. And so, yeah, I did, but I had opportunities, messed up, and finally it clicked. And once it clicks, it seems like, it gets a little bit easier.
Yeah. That's with so many things in life. You try and try, you bang your head on the door, yes, trying, and all of a sudden the door opens up and you're like, oh.
It's not like you find the magic formula that works. It's just, it all makes sense and comes together.
Yeah.
And you see where to focus, what to get rid of, and, I'm still fine-tuning.
Well, yeah, you if you're fine-tuning, then I'm not even rough-tuning yet. So, but anyhow, for the listener here, I want to get into some of these more, how would I say? I don't want to get into it, tips, tactic, cow call this, cow call that, make this type of variation. That's been hashed over forever. I want to talk about this, for me anyhow, and this is why I want to approach it this way in the podcast, is my greatest learning experiences come from failures.
Totally.
I think of just about everything that I now do instinctively. It wasn't because I did it instinctively before. It's because I screwed something up
enough times.
Yeah, and the lesson was driven home because of that kick in the gut of, oh man, I had it and I screwed it up. And so I don't know if there's an experience in your elk hunting times where, and maybe you just gave me that look like,
don't go there, Randy. No.
Yeah, not just one. Which of the 40 you want me to talk about?
Yeah.
But and maybe I'll start with, and you said you hunted elk 10 years before you killed one. I didn't take up archery hunting till later in my hunting life. And I hunted elk for 7 years before I killed one with a rifle. And I hunted hard. I mean, I'd moved to Montana. I'd left Minnesota, went to college in Nevada, and then I moved to Montana. And my goal in life, outside of my wife, my son, and my work and my family, was Randy had to kill a bull elk to validate that he wasn't a complete idiot. And I can't even tell you how many crazy things I tried, how many stupid things I did. But I was what I'd call a new elk hunter.
Yeah.
In your observation, or if you hunt with new people or you talk or interact with them, is there some misconception out there that a lot of new elk hunters have that is common and it's something that they just got to figure out a way through? Or I guess maybe a better way to say it is, do new elk hunters do a certain thing that just you look at it and say, someday they'll realize that's the wrong thing to do?
There are a few things that I can look back on, and I guess it's different for every situation, every person, but I guess there are some things that consistently successful elk hunters on public land do that sometimes take a little bit of trial and error to get to. I think for a new hunter, the thing I see most that I would just remind, pound into the head if you can, the wind, number one. You will never beat the wind. There's no point even dropping down into a canyon 3 miles and getting an elk bugle and trying to approach it with the wind blowing towards it, because you've just wasted that whole hunt. It's not going to work out. So like you said, we sometimes will leave that elk overnight. We will go and come back the next morning, the wind's good, or we will walk clear around the canyon to get to the other side, because you have no chance. So at least doing that, there's still a chance. So the wind is number one. Another thing that I really, it's again that fine line, but aggression. And I think a lot of new elk hunters are not aggressive, and the primary reason of that is confidence.
Right.
And I really think that confidence is the key. And it's hard to say, well, how do you gain confidence? Because if you've never been successful, is it fair to think that you can be confident? And absolutely it is. And that confidence comes from applying those lessons that you learn line upon line until they build up to a point where you're confident. And that's, what we talked about earlier. At some point it clicks. And I don't think it's any secret formula that clicks. I don't think it's, I found the tactic that works every time. I think it's you get to a point where when you step into the elk woods, you're like, it's going to happen. It might not be today, but I'm going to be persistent enough because I'm confident enough that sometime in the next 5 days, I'm going to be presented with an opportunity. And then that's a whole nother story, is capitalizing on that opportunity. But
and that's very much a parallel to how I kind of got over that first hurdle of elk hunting. I thought there were shortcuts. I thought you could buy this gizmo or this gadget, or if you read this magazine article, or, okay, I must be hunting in the wrong spots. Or, I was hunting in some of the best elk country in America.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that. I had every kind of doodad thingamajobby you could think of, and that wasn't doing it. And I'll go back to my walleye fishing. I grew up walleye fishing in northern Minnesota, and one summer, I told my wife, I said, I'm killing an elk this fall. And she's like, well, it's June, God, get over it. And I realized that in my walleye fishing, I understood the behaviors of walleyes. I understood their needs. I understood their biology. I understood everything about a walleye. And because I had that much information, I was confident. That knowledge brought forth the confidence to say, you know what, these walleyes are going to be in 8 feet of water in late May because they've just spawned and they're staging out there. Yep. Even though I didn't find them right away, I had the confidence because of the knowledge that I had acquired. And like you said, knowledge equals confidence, which eventually equals success. And
then success builds that confidence more. And so it comes full circle, and that's when the snowball happens. And it's like, hey, consistency happens at this point.
Yeah. And so that summer I went and bought a book by Jack Ward Thomas. I think it was called The Ecology of Elk, or Elk Ecology, or something like that. And I read that. And I sat down and I took just copious notes of, okay, what are the needs of these elk at certain times of year? And he went into all this detail about food preferences at certain times of year, this food versus that food. And I realized, you know what, Randy? When you learn what an elk needs at a certain time of year, you can then solve the riddle a whole lot easier versus not doing that homework, not doing that study, not investing the time to know what elk do at the time of year you're hunting them. First day of elk season in Montana, I sleep at the trailhead. I walk out to my favorite rock where I doubted there were any elk there because I'd hunted there many years before. I had not killed an elk, but I'd see tracks. I'm like, what'd they do? They fly away when I show up here? I'm like, all right, these elk are going to be here for this reason, because it's a post-rut period, all right? The bulls are going to be looking, they're going to be kind of heading to their sanctuary areas. They're going to need some feed, so I go and set up in this spot. By 11 o'clock the next morning, or that morning, I'm standing over my first bull elk, getting ready to notch my tag. And that was, for me, that kind of where the snowball started.
Yep.
It was like, Randy, think about this, but just don't walk into the woods and walk around like this is a random event.
Got to be a strategy.
Right. And actually, the strategy I use even today is so simple that when I was doing the seminar today, I'm sure some of these people are looking at him like,
I sat through here for this? Where's the value?
Yeah.
And I'm the same way. I simplify it so much that sometimes the value, I think, is, hey, step back and start over here. You've gone, you're complicating it too much.
Yep. Hit the reset button and think about 1 or 2 key points that will get you to success.
Yep.
And then start worrying about some of this other minutia.
First off, you going back to fishing, you can have the best bait in the world and the hungriest fish in the world, but if they aren't there, you aren't going to catch one. You aren't going to get a bite.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, if you go into there where there's a rich pool of fish and you don't have the right bait, or those fish have plenty of food and they just aren't hungry right then, it's not going to matter. So all of those pieces come together. You've got to find the elk first. You've got to know where they're going to be and get in there. But you can't even employ your tactics until you're in that area, in that situation. Then it becomes a matter of fine-tuning the tactics, and tactics without elk aren't going to work, and elk without tactics aren't going to work. So there's a puzzle there that...
Yeah, and that's where, because of doing the TV show, if there's one place in the elk hunting sphere of knowledge that I've been forced to ramp up my learning curve, it's finding where elk will be at whatever time of year. And short of archery season, in rifle season, I think elk are one of the easiest animals to kill once you find them. No, yeah, with a bow, that's all different.
Well, no, and I laugh because I've killed one elk with a rifle in my life. Uh-huh. My 12-year-old son has now killed more elk than I have with a rifle. And for me, when he started hunting, I've archery hunted my whole life. And so rifle hunting was intimidating for me. When he got old enough to hunt, I said, buddy, I'm sorry. I'm the wrong guy. I'm not a good elk hunter because he couldn't pull back enough weight on his bow. It was so scary to me. I had so little confidence in my rifle hunting abilities that I didn't know where to find elk.
Yeah.
I can take a bugle and stand on a ridge and tell you if there's an elk down there or not in September. October, when they aren't bugling, it's a different ball game. So I relied heavily on some of the things that you've wrote and talked about on how to find elk at different times. And it's because of that information that I was able to take away with previous experiences from archery hunting and those things that I've learned over the years, that the second day out with an 11-year-old, he killed his first elk. Wow. This year, the first morning out, literally, I kid you not, I read an article that you wrote on how to find elk at different times of the year the night before we went hunting. And the next morning, my son shot a 6-point bull with his rifle. And so, there are skills you can have, but I was missing that one component of how do I find elk in late October?
Yeah.
And by reading one simple article that tapped into your knowledge database, it gave me all the tools I needed to be able to go out and have confidence and to be successful with an 11 or a 12-year-old boy who doesn't have any experience. He has a lot of confidence because of what's happened in the last 12 months, but
well, maybe that was just a random piece of luck that what Randy happened to write somehow that day there was an elk.
You know what? I will take luck over skill every day of the month of September. So,
but that gets to your point that you were just making there in the fishing analogy of if there are not elk where you're at, you can be the best caller in the world. You can be the best long-range shooter in the world. You can be whatever. But you can't kill an elk that you can't find.
Yeah.
And that's the point of my seminar today and point of just about all my seminars and in the book that we're going to have out in the next, hopefully 6 or 7 months is to kill one, you have to find one. Yep. And if you don't know where to find them in the 5 seasons, I break it down into 5 seasons. And that might have been the article you were reading.
It was, yep.
For me, there's the early season, which is like August. There's the pre-rut, which is late August, early September. There's the peak rut, which is like mid-September to, early October, sometime in there. Then there's the post-rut, which is, October 10th towards the end of October. And then there's what I call the late season, which is anything after November 1st. And I see people who will hunt elk in the December or November, whatever it is, late season, in the same places they were hunting them in the peak rut. Guess what, folks? They have a completely different need in November than what their primary need was in September.
Not only need, well, yes, and the need drives
where they're going to be.
The herd dynamics of the bulls are by themselves in that pre-rut. They're in bachelor groups. The cows are down where they have their calves, and then the rut starts kicking in. They move locations, and they go find those cows. Well, late season like that, they go off by themselves again.
Right.
And those cows are in different locations, which none of it is necessarily where the rut happened in September. And so there's understanding those dynamics of what elk are doing, why they're doing it, feed-based, winter range-based, all these different things, cover, water in the all of those different aspects. It really it really does. The elk can't be here during this time of year because of this, or the elk are gonna be here. And so, a lot of those points that you made in that article were, the light bulb went off for me. I said, okay, here's where they were in September. I need to go here and look for them. And sure enough, we were into elk within 3/4 of a mile of the truck right at daylight the first morning, having never scouted or set foot there.
And I'm thankful. I'm almost blushing that Cory would even attribute anything like that to some scribing I wrote on the back of a napkin. But let's tell the rest of the story, though. Your son's 12 years old, and I don't want, parent custody services to show up and take your son away because he earned that.
Because of the pain I inflicted upon him.
Yeah. Tell a little bit about how gruesome or how grueling it was, but what did he think of that? Did he think that was, Dad, this was cool?
He, at one point, I think he said, this is the hardest thing I've ever done. And I would hate to give somebody an elk hunting experience without having them say that at least once, because elk hunting is tough. Yeah. And for him, he has logged a total of, not very many days actually in the woods with a weapon in his hand, and had great success. So for him, the success, the harvest part of the hunt seems a little bit easier than it really is right now.
Yeah.
He's going to learn the hard way. There is no doubt there will be years of failure that build him back up. But it was. We did 10.3 miles on GPS the day that he shot that bull.
Wow.
And it was not easy country. We were up in rocks. We were coming off of a shale rock bluff when we spotted his bull. And he dug his heels in and locked himself back into the cliff. And we stacked up 2 backpacks for him to get a rest on, and shot off of that. He almost fell down the mountain, was trying to celebrate after he shot it there. And not to the point where he was in danger of tumbling off a cliff, but it was a steep hill. We got there, it was about an hour before dark. We quartered it, we hung it in a tree, and we went out that night through the blowdowns and everything in the dark, and came in the next day to pack it out. And it was 6.3 miles of packing his elk out the next day.
Wow. And he's 12?
He's 12, and so I loaded him up with a hind quarter. We boned everything out the next morning, because being super dad, I thought one trip out of here is all we've got.
No.
I have packed multiple elk out in one trip with another partner.
Right.
When that partner's an adult, it's not much fun.
Right.
When that partner's 12, I loaded too much on him.
Yeah.
So I gave him a hind quarter boned out, and the head and the antlers. And
how far did he make it?
We made it about 10 feet, and he said, Dad, I think there's something wrong with my hip. And he said, it feels like it's tingling and burning, but it's not hot. And I said, buddy, that's your hip flexor. You're going to get to know it really well over the next several miles. And he was a trooper. We did end up dropping, when we got to the really steep part, we dropped part of his pack and shuttled it down that steep part. But he earned it. I introduced him to trekking poles, and I couldn't get him out of his hands. It was, he was leaning on them. But it was rugged. Yeah. He earned it. He really did.
That's a special experience. For anybody who gets to shoot their first elk, it's a special experience for us who are the mentors or fathers when our kids shoot their first elk. And there's a part of me that is so grateful that elk hunting was so difficult for me, that I had to work so hard to kill my first bull. Because I think a lot of people, everything you do in life, you have to have this mental mindset to be successful. Yep. And I think a lot of people watch too many TV shows or read too many articles, and they think they're just going to go out there in the first day, they're going to shoot an elk half mile from the trailhead. And when that doesn't happen, they get discouraged.
Yeah. And then it becomes a negative experience. That hunt becomes a negative experience, rather than looking at it as, I am gaining information, experience every day. I need to apply the failures of today. I didn't find elk. I've got to find elk. That's the lesson. That's the failure of today. I didn't find elk. Tomorrow I have to find elk.
Right.
And then you find elk and they wind you. And that's the lesson. You just have to keep applying those lessons of failure and looking at them as this isn't failure. This is me improving, and there's a positive there.
Yeah. And there are those days, and you and I both hunt exclusively public land. There are those days, and I'll admit it, that I've been busting my hump, and we've been doing these, like 2 weeks ago in Wyoming. We did a 14-mile day in the snow one day in the mountains, and the wind blew 35 miles an hour. When I got back that night, I'll admit that I said, I understand why people go and pay money to get exclusive access to elk that aren't as pressured or as spooky or whatever. But I know that my gratification of hunting and why I hunt in large part comes because of the challenge that it represents, the effort required. That first bull I shot was just a little raghorn 4x5. But I look at the pictures of that bull, and it's still one of my greatest hunting accomplishments. Since then, I've shot, I don't know how many bulls that are, really nice bulls, and they're all great memories. But none of them are on the same scale of personal gratification as when I solved the riddle and just kept pushing forward. And that then, after shooting one, and then it's like the dominoes were all in place. It was just elk after elk after elk after elk. And a lot of people have asked me, and I never really took time to think about it. They're like, well, how did all of a sudden it become so easy? And I think part of it, not all of it, but part of it was I now had the proper expectation of what investment of effort and time it was going to take to be successful on public land.
Yep.
Before then, I don't think I had set my mind to the proper expectation.
Totally.
And I think we as humans, it's our nature. If our expectations are not met, we get discouraged.
Yep.
And so if you set your expectations maybe too low or
you set them too low, you never get to the point where you're going to reach that success. If you set them too high and don't expect failures along the way, you get disappointed and you give up. And so success rates are 10, 12%, something like that.
Yeah.
I don't want to be in that 90% echelon right there. I don't want to be in there. I don't want to be the one that goes once every 10 years and kills an elk.
Right.
That means I have to try harder than average.
Yeah. And that, I think that's a big part of, and I don't know if the axiom is true, but they say 90% of the elk are killed by 10% of the hunters. And, it's probably not that. It's
probably not a factual statistic.
Right. Maybe it's 70% are killed by 30%. I don't know. But all of the guys I know who hunt public land exclusively, and year after year, place after place, whether it's archery season, rifle season, whether it's Arizona or Idaho, whether it's, early season or late season, they seem to figure it out and fill a tag. Those are the people who are, mentally they're strong. They don't have this expectation that it's going to be easy. Yeah, some days, opening morning, there he is, boom, you're done. But that's, you kind of approach it as that was a gift.
A big gift.
Right. The expectation is I'm going to do 10 miles a day in brutal conditions, up and down, competing with other hunters for 5 days before I get an encounter. In my mind, if I get one encounter in 5 days, that's kind of the norm. Fortunately, good luck, whatever, I get encounters more frequently than that. But my mental expectation is, hey, all right, it's day 3. I haven't had a good encounter yet. That's all right. It might take 2 more.
And I think to build on that, what's amazing to me is after 30 years of elk hunting, my expectation hasn't changed. My confidence doesn't lower my expectation of how long it's going to take. My wife, so my 12-year-old's in school, he's in sports, everything, so it leaves me with like a Friday night and a Saturday morning to hunt with him on the weekends. That's all we get. And my wife's like, just take him up tonight and you can, hunt tonight and come back tomorrow morning. I'm like, you don't understand. We need a solid 5 days in a row to string this together to really have a chance. In my mind, we're wasting our time. She's like, just go and maybe it'll happen, spend the time with him. But that expectation for me is I'm wasting my time in 24 hours to go and try to do an elk hunt. I need 5 days just to find the elk, to hunt the elk, to make a few mistakes, to put it together and have a chance of being successful. And obviously his track record is blowing my expectations out of the water, which is going to make the failure part that much more painful for him. But
yeah. Oh, well, that's just, I think that's one of the beauties of elk hunting is elk hunting. There's no hunting I do, and I've not been able to hunt any of the wild sheep because I've never drawn a tag, so I can't speak to that. But there is, over the course of a long period of hunts, of multiple elk hunts, there's no hunting I do where the reward is earned. Yeah, occasionally you get lucky. But over the course of many hunts, elk force you to earn it.
And I think that's the allure of elk hunting is, yes, the country is beautiful, the experience, all of that, but there's a conflict there. There's a struggle to get to success. And, the quote is, the greater the conflict, the greater the victory or whatever.
Right.
Elk hunting that's the epitome of elk hunting because there is a struggle and there is an elation when you're successful. When it finally comes together, you realize this was earned.
Yeah, and to me, that's why, and you and I were talking about this before we turned the podcast on, is, I don't like to get into the quantitative stuff. I don't like scores. To me, score, yeah, it's this relative thing hunters talk about, but to your point there of the reward is in the effort given and the trials and tribulations, the trail it took you to become successful. That's where, if someone gives that effort, like on my first 3 bulls were all raghorns, those were trophies to me, in the definition of what I give a trophy.
Totally.
And anybody who shoots an elk on public land should be dancing up and down because that's an accomplishment.
Absolutely.
And I don't care if it's a spike, a cow, a raghorn, or a 380-inch bull.
Yep. I just think that the experience and the adventure should be what define the trophy, not an inch or a number.
Right.
And that's, this year is a prime example. I've shot a lot of elk. We went to Wyoming. I had an expectation in my mind of what I wanted to shoot, not a minimum score or anything, but just a representative bull. And the bull that I shot, a lot of people would probably say, I wouldn't shoot that on the last day of a public land road, whatever it is. But the experience I had, that was, the video we got, 6 yards, frontal, just the bull dropped right there within 35 yards. The struggles that we'd had to get to that point, all of that bull is not going to score great. But for me, that was a trophy. The experience of it all, that's a memorable hunt for me. Yeah. And it's not the size of the elk that makes the hunt memorable.
I couldn't agree more. So, all right, we got off on some really valuable stuff, I think, there in between the question. I asked the question, what's the most common mistake or the common thing that new hunters do that they should do differently?
Did I answer that or did I avoid that? Okay.
No, you did, and it led us down a really great path. But the next question was, what's the most common mistake or common thing that experienced elk hunters do that they should do differently?
I will speak from experience, not saying I'm an experienced elk hunter, but
are an
from experience. I have learned to never quit learning.
Yeah.
And I think if we think we have elk figured out, we're going to get a big dose of humble pie. Yeah. Because it changes every day. Every elk is different. Every situation, every area, every day can change. So if we get in a rut and say, this is all I'm going to do, I'm only going to aggressively bugle to kill elk, it's not going to happen every time. And so I think sometimes we get stuck in a rut, in a pattern, in a habit. The other thing I think is thinking I've hunted this area for 10 years or for 15 years. I don't need to scout. I don't need to do anything. I'm just going to show up there and put all my eggs in that basket and go hunting. And for me, I've learned the hard way sometimes, the combination of those two mistakes of showing up there off of somebody else's information from the last 10 years or off of my own experience for the last 10 years, showing up there and then being stuck there saying, I've just got to keep going. They're going to be here. And then pretty soon 6 days is up and you haven't found the elk yet. So I think maybe not necessarily the mistake, but the thing to learn from that is to stay versatile, to know that there's elk there. If you can scout, even a day of scouting is worth 6 days of hunting.
Right. Because that day of scouting, I don't know how many times we've been out there where that day of scouting has saved me from investing 2 or 3 days of wasted time hunting somewhere where there weren't going to be any elk.
It's much better to wander for 3 days trying to find elk than to spend 3 days in an area where there are no elk.
Right.
Because you're going to have an encounter sometime in that wandering. Whereas if you're stuck in an area where there's no elk, and then you get desperate, then you start running around and just not thinking clearly, and pretty soon your week's gone, and so's your tag.
Yeah. And when I wrote that question down, it reminded me, I was on the Meat Eater podcast with Steve Ranella, and Steve, he and I have, talked many times, not just on podcasts, but in other places, about our hunting, because we both get to travel a lot to hunt. And he didn't quite ask it as to what was the most common mistake. He worded the question differently. He said, what in your hunting has taught you the most or made you the best? Not the best elk hunter. What was the best thing you've done to improve your knowledge and ability to be an elk hunter? And it caught me a little off guard, and because I had to think about it. I'm like, boy, I was thinking, was there one profound moment that, that was it? And it really wasn't. And the answer I gave Steve, and since I thought about it since then, I probably would have worded it slightly differently. But for me, what has made me more successful as an elk hunter, and like you, I'm the last guy who's going to consider myself an elk expert. I'm just a guy who gets to go on 5 to 6 elk hunts a year, who through that trial and error, you learn a little bit.
Yep.
And
if you don't,
if you don't,
you're never going to be there.
Yeah, you're going to have a lot of explaining to do. But for me, what has really helped me be more confident and confident that I have some knowledge is hunting elk in multiple different locations in multiple different seasons. I've hunted elk in every western state, every Rocky Mountain state, with the exception of your home state of Idaho. I'm not sure why they don't want my money. I apply every year, and every year I'm like, well, I'll apply in an easier to draw unit and an easier to draw unit. But anyhow.
Well, Randy, like 80% of the state is over the counter, so you just buy a tag and come over there.
All right. Well, maybe next year we're going to hunt in Idaho instead of Montana. But to that point, over the course of hunting multiple states, and even before I started the TV show in 2008, I did a lot of hunting in multiple states. I mean, one year I lucked out. I drew an early rifle tag in Arizona, 2005, Unit 10, early rifle elk. But before I even applied for that one, I think the results from Nevada were out in April or mid-May or something. I'm like, holy crap, I drew a Nevada bull elk tag. I call my buddy who lives in Williams, Arizona. I'm like, look, if I draw another elk tag, my wife's going to kill me. So where do I apply where I'm still going to get a bonus point and I will never draw? He's like, well, that's easy. Put in for early rifle in Unit 10. Okay, send my money in. Everyone's like, yeah, I got my refund.
Was that 2005?
2005, yeah.
So that was the USO debacle there where they had to add a whole bunch of non-resident tags.
Exactly.
Yep. I drew Arizona that same year.
Did you?
Unit 1 with 3 points. So,
okay,
yeah.
And lo and behold, I draw Arizona the same year. I draw Arizona early rifle. I got Nevada. And the only place I'd ever hunted elk to that point was Montana. And I went on those hunts, and I had great hunts, and I shot nice bulls in both of them. But a part of me was thinking, you know what, Randy? You would have been better off if you would have been hunting in these southern places before. If you would have had some failures there that would have taught you a few lessons.
Yeah.
If you would have went there and realized, okay, elk are kind of the same. They have the same needs, but they're going to be in different locations to satisfy those needs in Arizona than they are in Montana.
Well, just the demographics of the herd changes everything.
Yeah.
The number of, bull to cow ratio, age class of the bulls, the weather affecting the rut timing, all these different things that.
Yeah.
So it's a whole nother game.
It is. And so taking that to its next step where, okay, since then I've hunted Utah, Colorado many times, New Mexico many times. I've helped friends hunt Arizona. I've drawn Arizona 4 more times since then.
Hold on.
I've hunted.
Hold on. You've drawn Arizona 5 times in the last 10 years. That's statistically impossible, Randy.
No, it's not. Not if you focus on the late hunts. I mean, I'll never draw another early rifle tag there again, and I'm grateful that I drew. But having all those tags in different seasons, in different states, has really forced me that when I show up, and I tell people this is Randy's really scratched out back of the napkin plan is first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to figure it out. In other words, what's going on there, and that's usually my scouting day. Then I'm going to sort it out. And by sort it out, I mean I'm going to take everything I learned in my scouting, and I'm going to sort out what's important, what's not important for this hunt. And hopefully in the last 3 or 4 days, I'm going to pack it out. And by hunting in multiple places, archery seasons, rifle seasons, whatever, late seasons, early seasons, it's really helped me develop a strategy and a way to analyze so that with the TV show, when we show up, I mean, so many times we show up in a place we've never been.
Yep.
Got 5 days. I got to find elk, have some encounters on film, and we got to kill something within 5 days. Yep. You can't just randomly hope for good luck every hunt.
And that's, to me, that's part of the adventure. I get emails daily. Hey, can you point me into some GPS coordinates where I can find elk in Montana? I'm coming from out of state. I don't have time to scout. Could you just get me into a drainage that has some elk? You're missing the learning. You're missing the most valuable data that you can gain in experience.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it was 1 or 2 podcasts ago, someone had sent me an email question saying, why don't you tell people where you hunt? Because to your point, one, that's the huge part of the learning experience. It's going to benefit you for every future hunt, is having to learn how to do this research and gather that information. So that's a big part of why we don't do it. The other is, if I told you this GPS coordinate, next year on opening day, there'd be 25 rigs parked right there. And that wouldn't be fair to the people who hunt that area.
It blew me away this year in Montana that we would stand up on a ridge and Randy's camera guy would be panning these landmarks that I'm like, anybody can figure out where we are. Are you sure you want to, let's go over here for the interview piece because you've got this lake in the background. And why was it that you were okay with sharing that with everyone?
Because most people aren't willing to go where we were at.
Because of?
Grizzly bears.
Grizzly bears.
So, yeah.
Darn my fears of rattlesnakes and grizzly bears. But no, and it's, there's some places that are sacred. Other places we know that we could draw a picture and people either aren't going to go there because it's too steep, it's too hard to get in there, or there's other things that are going to keep them out of it, like grizzly bears or rattlesnakes. And then, we have spent time, we have learned by trial and error. And these areas, a lot of times year after year, produce, and all it takes is 1 or 2 more guys going in there, letting the wind get the elk, and they're out of there, and then that changes our plans. And so there's an adventure in finding your own areas. Now, yes, I do my research. I ask questions. What are the elk herds like in this unit? Those are good questions to ask. To call up and say, I've never elk hunted before. Can you draw me a map and point me right where to go? That's probably not the right approach to.
No, and just personally, when I get that, because I get that email a lot also, I just say, I'm not going to deprive this person of the benefit and the value of the experience of having to figure it out themselves. Yeah, I'll give them some general ideas, but I'm like you. I'm not. I'm not right. This drainage. South Fork of, Dead Bear Creek or something.
Yeah.
No, I'm just not going to do that.
And everybody's got their pencils out and wrote down South Fork of Dead Bear Creek.
Well, I am going to tell people, because a couple people have figured this out with our TV show. Do not trust every image you see in Randy Newberg's TV show, because a lot of times we shoot something and we will go to a different part of the mountain range and we will find a very scenic and recognizable place and we'll film a bunch of scenics there. And people think that's where we're hunting. Yep. Little do they know we were 14 miles away from there. So, and part of that is just because for the people who have done the homework and invested their time to learn that area, I don't want my TV show to be this go right here and screw it up for those guys.
Yep.
So, wow, we're talking some good stuff here. This might be 2 podcasts here. But so we talked about what's the most common mistake new hunters make or what they could do differently, and the same for experienced hunters. Now that you're at this point in your hunting life, Cory, whenever something goes snare wire, is there, when it happens, do you say, oh, dang, I did that again, or I failed to consider that again? Is there any common thing that even at this point in your hunting life you find that excitement takes over, or this or that, or?
There are a lot of things. Wind is number one, and it's out of my control to a degree. But there are a lot of things I've learned to be able to control the wind. And it's, it's not some psychomental thing that, hey, I can control the wind, but just recognizing what thermals are doing. And instead of being above the elk when the thermals are coming up, if the thermals change, now all of a sudden it's going down, getting down on the same level of the elk and coming across to it. So if thermals change, it's an up-down change, and it still doesn't blow the elk out. Little things like that, I think applying it limits the effect that the negative effect wind can have on your thermals can have. There's, it seems like every year, the first 2 or 3 days out elk hunting, I'm kicking myself saying, I'm such a novice. Did I really forget in the last 12 months that's the dumbest thing that I can do in the elk woods? Why did I just do that? And it's always on the biggest bulls, it seems like, that I do those stupid things. But I am not anywhere near to a point where I can say I don't make dumb mistakes, because I do.
And I'm in that same boat. And it's like, just because I have a TV show doesn't mean that I've got a clue. Yep. I mean, my wife at times will say, we'll be fishing, and I've been walleye fishing longer than I've been elk hunting. She'll be like, do you have a clue? We've been out here for 10 hours and we haven't had a bite yet.
That's the best thing about wives, is just their ability to keep us humble.
Oh, isn't that truth? They know it, and they know the button to hit. They got us dialed in. But, since I asked you that, as you were answering the question, I'm thinking, okay, Randy, what's probably the one thing that you hang yourself up on and it causes you to have, either you got to work harder to have success or it messes up your success? And it's probably, I rely too much on the idea that everything this year is going to be the same as last year, because there are variables that change the landscape, whether it's drought, whether it's flood, whether it, whatever, it might have been a fire. If ever I find myself making the same mistake, not every time at the same, or every year in the same hunting location, what it is kind of is a general pattern that, okay, 2 years ago in Colorado, when I had this over-the-counter tag, there were elk there. So rather than scout as hard as I should have, or research as hard as I should have of what was the change this year, oh, gee, season opened 5 days later. Or,
muzzleloader season lands on this point and more pressure during that week, all these different variables.
So I think the human nature is, I'm in a hurry, I'm a little bit lazy, I'm a little bit overconfident, and I go there and I haven't done enough current homework. Yep. I waste 2 or 3 days before finally it's like the light comes on. Hey, knucklehead, guess what? There's a foot of snow this year. It was bare dry when you were here last year. Oh, yeah. Why didn't I think of that?
Where are they might be lower in elevation this year.
And so that, in spite of, I don't know how many elk hunts I've been on, 5 or 6 years for 8 years doing the TV show and probably 20 more before that. So I don't know. It's that 50, 60 elk hunts. I'm so far from having it figured out. I feel like if I am reading a 40 chapter book, I'm like on midway through the second chapter. That's how I feel.
Yep.
And maybe I'm not, but that's kind of how I feel. So, well, we've covered an awful lot of stuff about elk hunting. And if the audience wants you and I to talk more about elk hunting, hopefully they'll email you and I, and we can put the headphones back on again someday.
It's amazing how quickly the time's gone. I don't even feel like we've got into any of the questions that matter. It's all, we've just scratched the surface here. There's so much that elk hunting's, once it gets in your blood, you can just ramble on for hours and hours about it.
Yeah. So before we go on to the next thing, and the next thing is going to be, I want to know what Corey Jacobsen is up to. We're going to pay a bill here while we're talking. In the podcast world, advertisements are not a 30-second commercial where someone can DVR through it. So, and before I talk about this, I want people to understand that I am probably the biggest equipment snob I know of. And not from, I got to have the most expensive equipment. I got to have stuff that works for me. And I turn down way, way more equipment offers than I ever accept. Every piece of equipment that I use in our show or that we promote on the website, I used it for a couple of years for free before I decided, all right, we might. I look at my Leupold rifle scopes. Since I was, a little piker, I had Leupold rifle scopes on my rifles. It's not because all of a sudden Randy decided, I'm going to do a TV show and I want someone to pay me to use Leupold rifle scopes. When Kenetrek boots started, I was wearing Kenetrek boots the day they started selling those boots. And 4 or 5 years later, I started a TV show and I've been offered to use so many different types of boots since then. No. And the reason I say that is when you hear Randy Newberg make a pitch about a piece of equipment, it's because it works. And Cory, you are involved in the pro staff of Sitka Gear. And you know that when Randy started this TV show, for the first 3 years, I went out and I bought every brand of what was considered high quality, performance type clothing that was on the market. And I bought sets for me and my guest hunters out of my own pocket. So anyone who prices, performance clothing knows that that's an investment. Yep. And time and again, I had asked the guest hunters, well, what's your verdict? Sitka Gear. And at the time, the guys at Sitka Gear is like, Randy, who? And I had other companies saying, boy, we'll give you free gear and we'll pay you some money. But I wasn't interested in what paid me the most. And that's probably why I've never made any money in the TV show. Here I am, a CPA, and my wife always says, Randy, because we review the financial statements at the end of every year, kind of doing our own little huddle. And she's like, would you advise one of your CPA clients to operate this way?
Do as I say, not as I do.
Right. But so the point of that is, before I talk about this next product, is if Randy Newberg is telling you that he uses this, it's not, I really don't give two hoots about the money. I'm doing it because that's what I think people should be using. So,
well, I'll add a little bit more to that. Randy is tough on equipment. Randy abuses stuff, and all the way from his truck to his tires to his bow to everything there. And if Randy talks about gear that lasts, it's going to last for anybody, not just Randy. So.
Cory saw first first person example of that when we were hunting. I don't know the abuse we put on my truck, my tires. A couple times my bow got used for I think a pole vault to get across a creek. It's but I buy gear to use it.
And I don't know do you have an arrow sponsor?
No.
You need one.
Oh, do I?
Well, just after losing so many arrows shooting at grouse, that's got to be an expense. So.
It is, and I have these judo points. I need some of those head chopper offers. What was that
those G5 small game head.
Yeah.
They're just
holy cow. That's like the guillotine there, man. Whew. But anyhow, man, it's taken me 6 minutes to get to this next plug I want to talk to you about, and it has to do with a cooler company. I spend 80 days a year living out of coolers. It's just what we do, and I've tried them all. I get them sent to me. I've got a cooler a shop full of the El Cheapo broken coolers. I've tried the high end. I've tried everything you can think of, and this last year, I used Orion coolers, and they are made in Tennessee, and the parent company is Jackson Kayaks. And those of you who are kayakers, I talked to some kayakers. I'm like, well, what's the deal with Jackson Kayaks? And they're like, oh man, they are it in the kayak world. I'm not a kayaker. So I went and I told them, all right, send me some. And Randy's kind of this, I'm always the skeptic. And they send them to me and I'm using them. I'm like, this feature's really well thought out. Wow, this latch doesn't stick out like the other high-end coolers I've looked at before. Wow, they've got these divider compartments that actually make sense. They're exactly the size of what a case of bottled waters would be. I'm like, someone was thinking about this. All right, let me see if I can abuse them to the point of no end. So we took them out this year, and they just, oh boy, they really got the beat over. But they withstood it. They perform marvelously. A common event for Randy is I go to New Mexico or Arizona and I live in a tent, and I got to have ice that lasts for a week while I'm down there, because if I kill something, I'm driving. I'm not one of these TV guys who gets to fly everywhere. I got to drive everywhere. And it's, 20-hour drive back home to Montana from New Mexico, and I got to have that bowl on ice. And so what I usually do is I take a cooler full of frozen milk jugs and just one cooler. We don't open it. We put it like a saddle blanket over it, and it stays in the shade. And I thought, well, I'm going to replicate that with these Orion coolers. So I went to Colorado, and I filled one of the coolers full of frozen milk jugs, and I left it in the hot motel room for 7 days. 24, this isn't like in the evening it gets cold in the motel room and in the day it warms
regulated
up.
Temperature.
Right. This was hot. And after the 7th day, I'm like, boy, I bet you there's a lot of water in those milk jugs. No, hardly any. I was so impressed. I could not believe. But they got 2.5 inches of this premium insulation everywhere around the cooler. And you guys are going to hear me talk about these coolers in future podcasts. So I'm not going to bore you to death here, but Randy Newberg is telling you, and as Cory said, I am a serious abuser of equipment. The Orion coolers that I tried this year impressed the heck out of me, and they're something I'm going to be using going forward. So if you want to check them out, go to orioncoolers.com, and I think you'll be as impressed as I was. So anyhow, that's every once in a while we got to pay a bill here every so often. So we're going to I'm going to give us about 20, 30 minutes, Cory. We're going to talk about elk101.com. And, some of you I know are saying, Newberg, you're an idiot. You have this forum called hunttalk.com. And you're going to bring a guy on your podcast and just open the mic and let him say anything he wants to say about his forum and his website, elk101.com. But
I'm gonna steal all of your forum members and bring them to ours, and
are you?
yeah.
Okay. Well,
'Cause that's what happens, right? I mean, we're competitors in that, and it's all me or all you. So.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, all one or the other. And so, for those of you who don't understand the way Cory and I look at things, I call it abundance thinkers and scarcity thinkers. And I think Cory and I both subscribe to the idea of abundance, that, someone can be participating in two different forums and it's not the end of the world.
And the reality is they are.
They are. And our combined, you and I collaborating on things, I think helps all those members.
I would hope. It's the principle of, if there's two boats there on the same water and the water goes up, both the boats go up.
Yeah.
And that's how I look at it. Like you said, I'd rather be one who builds rather than trying to spend my time knocking somebody else down, thinking that's how I'm getting ahead.
So anyhow, for those of you wondering why a guy who owns hunttalk.com, a big public land Western hunting forum, would invite and want to know what a guy who owns an elk-specific forum, elk101.com, why I do that, what Cory and I just told you is why I want to do that. I want you guys to know what Cory's up to at Elk 101. So with that, tell me what's going on in the Corey Jacobsen world and the Elk 101 world. What are we going to be seeing in the next, I don't know if you want to say 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, a year,
sure.
However you want to say it.
Yeah. So, Elk 101 was created several years ago as a one-page website to get people to sign up to go to a seminar that I was asked to do, a class, a 6-hour elk hunting class. And I said, well, if I'm going to do that, I need to get paid for my time. And so we created a website. We put a PayPal Pay Here button on it, a picture of me with an elk, and said, sign up for the class at this time. And it was a WordPress blog type page. We had comments enabled, and people started asking questions. What are you going to cover in this class? I don't know how to call elk. Are you going to be going over that? So we started answering those questions. Pretty soon I'm posting video clips and pictures. And, fast forward a couple of years, we hit 1 million page views on this web page called elk101.com. And it grew off of the premise of it's educational. I wanted to share my experiences of elk hunting with others who were either intimidated or wanted to improve, whatever it was. I wanted a resource for others to get them excited about what I'm excited about. I have a passion for elk hunting, and I know there's a lot of other people out there that want to try it. And like we talked about earlier, they go out, they get discouraged because of their expectations. They don't have the confidence. They don't have the skills. So that's what Elk 101 was created to be, is not a place to say, hey, look at me, I'm a great elk hunter, not a place to brag about scores or anything, just to share that passion and that elk hunting knowledge. Fast forward a couple of years from there, we create a magazine, we launch a magazine, things get busy, and we ended up selling elk101.com about 1.5 years ago and focused on the magazine. And as I'm focusing on the magazine, I'm realizing that things are going digital a little bit faster than maybe I had thought. And my ideas and my thought process is starting to rapidly go digital, and recognize that, hey, elk101.com was a really good platform for all of these cool projects that I have lined up in my mind. So the stars aligned. We sold Extreme Elk Magazine to Elk Hunter Magazine, and at the same time started down the road of becoming involved with Elk 101 through partnership, through ownership. And I'm super excited that just here in the last few days, we've made it final, and I've actually purchased Elk 101 back. So I'm full ownership of Elk 101, back at the driver's seat of it. And I'm so excited for the projects we have, because it's been 5 or 6 years in the making of developing some of these projects and getting them to the point where they're tangible, they have legs, and they're going to be pretty exciting.
They are. And so Cory and I are out chasing elk in September in Montana, and we're like two mad scientists trying to solve this riddle of how do you inform, entertain, and educate a digital audience? Because in Hunt Talk, I have the same thing. And we're launching our big YouTube channel next month, January 1st. And that's going to have, a lot of the kind of stuff, not elk specific, but, public land issues, bag dumps of what gear we use. And we are going to do one series out there called Elk Talk. And what it is every week I'm going to release a new video that walks a hunter through, here's how you acquire tags. Here's all the options, all the states, explain all that, explain preference points versus bonus points. Then, okay, you drew a tag or didn't draw a tag, here's the over-the-counter options. And then kind of as the calendar rolls, have relevant video clips that say, okay, now you've got a tag, here's your scouting, here's what you got to do for your what I call desk scouting or e-scouting. Here's some skills you got to be thinking about. Here's some, equipment issues here, blah, blah, blah. So that by the time late August rolls around, we've provided them kind of the whole video walkthrough of you should be able to go and kill a bull elk this year, or, at least improve your chances.
Have the confidence to.
Right. And so you're doing something that is going to be video intensive.
There will be some video components of it. Yep.
And tell me what that is.
Well, we can't let it out.
Can't let it out
yet.
Oh, man.
Can't let it out yet. But my goal has always been to share the passion and the experience that comes with that, so that others can be confident. And right along those exact same lines of, there's no secrets. It's not a gimmick. We aren't trying to develop this product and then market a product and make people think this product is the golden ticket. That's not it. What I'm trying to do is tap into these years of experience, put them on paper, digitally on paper, in a way that expresses the passion, that educates, and that breaks it down so no matter where somebody is in their elk hunting life, never been before, never had a desire to go, now it's piqued their interest. That's me sharing that passion. You've got to experience an elk bugling in your face at 10 yards. If you've never done it, do it. I can't explain I can't put it into words. I can't put it into emotion enough to say, you just have to do it. Yeah. You have to do that. Whether it's you've been 10 times and never killed an elk. I've been there. I've got that perspective. Whether it's I've killed one elk and the last 3 years I haven't. What am I doing wrong? What can I do to get back to what I did right? Whether it's I kill an elk every year, but I need to learn a little bit more about calling. Whatever it is, we're going to touch that, and we're going to make sure that there's value available to those who want to improve, who want to learn, who want to go and do it.
So when's all this going to be?
So our expectation is mid-January. We're going to really start
2016
of 16. Yeah, so coming right up here.
Right. This podcast is going to air in early January.
Yep. So by the time you hear this, we're hoping to be within a couple weeks creating a buzz. But what we want to do is not just spew out everything that we think you need to know. We want to find from the listeners and from our followers, what are the key points? What are the frustrations? What are the intimidations? We want their input. We want to find out what we can answer based on our experiences that will benefit them, and have them help us create this process for them that we can then provide back.
Cool. Well,
it's, just to give you a really quick example of it. If you tried to explain something in detail on one topic, you could easily write, an article, a magazine article is usually 1,500 words to 2,000. The component of this, the module that we're doing on tracking, that includes anatomy, analyzing the anatomy of an elk so that when you find a drop of blood, you know where your hit is, the amount of blood, all of that. It's 10,000 words.
Wow.
It is video clips. It is diagrams. And these aren't just, somebody sketching on a napkin, here's the shoulder blade. We're trying to make this the most simple yet detailed product somebody's going to pick it up and say, there's value here and I'm a better elk hunter because of it.
Yeah.
And it's not something, you and I are going on very parallel paths here with the idea that your product and my product combined are going to be great. Right. They aren't going to compete. They're going to supplement. And so that's, we both love elk hunting, and we
Right.
want to share that. We
And-
want others to.
And as you were saying that, that's exactly what was going through my mind. Is I think the reason Cory and I hit it off so good, whenever we get together, is because we share that passion for wanting more elk hunters.
Yeah.
And
I don't want them in the drainage I hunt in, which is why I don't give out the GPS. But yes, we want to increase the number of elk hunters because we're on the same team. This is a teammate thing, not a competitor thing.
Yeah.
Our competition. I watched the movie Everest recently, and phenomenal movie. But there's a quote in there that says, "We don't need competition between people. There's enough competition between the mountain and the people, and the mountain always has the last word." And when it comes to elk hunt, it resonated. It was like, we don't need to be competing as elk hunters. We don't need to be competing at that level. Our competition is with the elk.
Yeah.
When I step in the ring, it's me and the elk. It's not me and the guy that's camped down the road 3 miles. I don't care about my elk being bigger than his or getting one before him. It's me and the elk always has the last word. Whether it's an arrow going after him right after he has the last word or him running away with the last word. But, I don't subscribe to that I'm very competitive, but I make sure that passion, that competition, that energy is channeled in the right way.
For me, I compete against myself.
Yep.
And my wife is like, you can be the most competitive SOB I know. And she says that not about, and sometimes it manifests as being bullheaded and stubborn.
Yep.
And I mean, for me, I guess you could almost say when I came to the SHOT Show in this city of Las Vegas in 2008, I got laughed out of the SHOT Show when I said I was going to do at the time it was going to be a DVD series of self-guided public land hunting. And my wife hates it when someone says, and especially if she's there and they say, well, that can't be done. She's like, oh no, don't tell this guy it can't be done. And because if it's something I'm passionate about, I set my own standards and I'm competing against what I've set for my standards. And I'm always happy for everyone else's success. I mean, without exception, if someone, and you and I both get it, someone comes with their phone and they're like, you want to see the bull I shot or the cow I shot? I'm always ecstatic for them. And I don't care how big it is. I don't care if it was on public land or private land. I don't care if it was guided or self-guided. The fact that they were out elk hunting or deer hunting, in this case, elk hunting, that's what I'm excited about.
Totally.
I mean,
and that they're excited about it, that they're excited. Their success is not defined by me or anyone else but them.
Right.
And if they pull out a picture of a cow elk that they shot with a rifle on a private ranch somewhere and they're excited about it, who am I to judge them and say, well, that's not a successful hunt?
Right.
I'm happy with them. And that's, we aren't competing against each other. When we do that, we lose. There's never going to be a winner in that.
Hunting loses.
Yep.
When hunters make it a competition, back to that quantitative thing we stated right at the beginning, hunting loses.
Totally.
Because you are trying to overlay your personal values, your personal experiences to what someone else's values and experiences are.
Or trying to place them above them, which, the argument of rifle hunters versus muzzleloader versus modern archery versus traditional archery, pretty soon we're all divided and trying to carve out our piece and make it primary and say these guys don't deserve it because,
right.
I'm a traditional archery hunter. The modern guys have an advantage, so I should get the prime rut. Let's work together. Let's be on the same team and try to accomplish what we're trying to do without taking away from somebody else.
Yeah, I agree completely, and I suspect most of our listeners are probably there nodding their head, and I hope, if anything, to the people listening, it's refreshing to see two guys like you and I who easily could make excuses about why we're competitive or why business wise. Oh, I'm not going to share anything with Cory or whatever. I mean, when you had the magazine, you felt comfortable calling me and saying, "Hey, Randy, write an article for me." I'm like, "Yeah, cool."
Comfortable. It was,
it's so. I hope that our collaborative things that we work on are, it's going to be, people are going to see it. I mean, the episode that we filmed this year is going to be on the show. So they're going to see us collaborating there. We're going to hopefully collaborate
much more.
Yeah, on other things. So if you guys hear Randy and Cory giving each other grief, Cory telling jokes about Randy's absolute schizophrenic, almost crazy grouse habits, that's all right.
You know, the greatest thing about that experience for me wasn't your OCD when you see a grouse. It wasn't the jumping out of the truck with the truck still rolling down the road. It was coming back like a whipped puppy and saying, I missed, and my wife is going to really, really make me sleep outside when I get home. If she finds out I missed that grouse, we've got to delete the footage of me missing, because if she sees that, I'm not going to be welcome back home. Cory, can you please go kill a grouse and let me tell my wife I got it? I mean, there was fear in the eyes. I can't even imagine how passionate your wife must be about having grouse for dinner.
She is. I forgot about that part. And it got to the point, folks, when one morning we went to one spot and we didn't hear any bugles. I told Cory, well, it's still just breaking daylight. Let's drive up to this other spot and see if we're hearing any bugles, and we'll jump out and go for a hike. And we're driving down this old logging road, and I hear Cory say, uh-oh. And I'm thinking, like, I got a flat tire, or he forgot something back at camp. And I didn't say anything for about 2 minutes. I'm like, you all right? What was that? He said, oh, I saw a grouse back there, and I was hoping that you didn't see it, because we certainly weren't going to get to the trailhead in time to get these elk if they would be there. So I don't know. It was a ton of fun. I hope we get to do it again for sure. I know that's one of the beauties of hunting.
And it goes back to, we didn't kill an elk on that hunt.
Nope.
But it was one of the most enjoyable hunts.
Yeah.
That I've been on, and it's just that adventure, the experience, the camaraderie, the company, just the whole thing. Yes, we had a tag in our pocket. Yes, I had a weapon in my hand. My goal was to kill something. We didn't do it. That doesn't mean the hunt was a failure.
Right. And when he just said my goal was to kill something, I'm going to call BS on that, because that first night, that elk that was standing down there bugling at you at 32 yards in the wide open
for 4 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, we almost had to change batteries in the camera. It stood there yelling at him for so long.
But it was the first night.
I know, but for you to say you wanted to kill something, I don't know about that. I think you wanted to milk it for all you could. Which there's nothing wrong with that. I'm guilty as charged on that also. But
we did. We hunted every available minute of that hunt.
We did. We hunted hard in that period of time. That's for sure. But it's not something that I hope is a one and done. So, well, folks, we've kept you a long time. I can make a couple commitments here that I will invite Cory to be back on this podcast, just because I think he's got so much to add to what we do. A lot of times you listen to the Hunt Talk podcast, and we get into this ugliness of politics. And the reason we do is because it's important to our future. But I don't want our podcast to just be nothing but ragging on politicians and all the doom and gloom that comes with public policy issues. And so this, like some of our past podcasts and certainly many of our future podcasts, has been about information, about friendship, about having fun. And so I hope that all of you like this. All of you have learned in following the podcast that out on Hunt Talk, we have these forum threads that talk about, hey, let us know what you want for guests. Let us know what you want for topics. Give us feedback about the podcast. So when this one airs, I'll forward the link to you, Cory, and you can see what the feedback is. Maybe they're going to say, you know what? You two guys, you're like grumpy old men. You're like Gustafson and whoever the other guy was on Grumpy Old Man. I don't think that'll be the case. But you got any parting thoughts, comments?
I just, I've respected Randy since I've known him. Just a wonderful steward of the sport that we love, the lifestyle that we embrace, and to be able to share 6 days hunting. You learn a lot about a person hunting. And one of my biggest fears is when people spend 6 days with me, they're going to find out what I'm really like, and they're not going to like me. And with Randy, it multiplied and exponentially increased my respect for him. So I'm grateful to have this opportunity to share an hour and a half with you in a hotel room in Vegas.
Well, that's flattering, Cory, and I appreciate that. But I agree with you. You know, in hunting, you're going to have those moments of challenge. And that's where it's easy to be the good guy when everything's going well. Yep. It's easy to be the happy dude when the elk are just walking out in front of you every minute next to the truck. Yep. You know, and that's we all go through that process of figuring out who are we going to hunt with, who are we not going to hunt with, and I think we end up being attracted to people who kind of share the same value systems, share the same motives for why we hunt and what we want out of the hunting experience. And I will agree that as much as, well, and this is another plug for a company that I don't get sponsored for. As much as Cory and I hit it off so great elk hunting, the dude understands what Dairy Queen is all about. Where we were hunting, there was a Dairy Queen about a half mile away, or a half hour away. I was going to say,
it wasn't a half mile.
Half hour away.
It was a morning hunt away.
Yeah, and anybody who knows Randy Newberg, anyone who grew up in the Midwest, and I don't know, are there a lot of Dairy Queens? And I know there's two in Twin Falls because I stop at both of them on my way
there's one
through.
just right down the road from our house.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that should be a criteria for selection. You know, some people say, well, I'm going to buy a house in this neighborhood because the schools are good. I want to be within 10 minutes of a Dairy Queen. You know, schools are important, but hey, let's get the priorities here. And so in addition to having a lot of fun hunting, Cory and I share the same Dairy Queen problem. And I judge a guy by, if I hang out with some guy and he's like, I don't do Dairy Queen, like,
you know, and Randy went right for the jugular on this to find out what kind of a friend he was hunting with. When we pulled up to Dairy Queen at 10:30 in the morning, he said, "You want an extra large Blizzard?"
Yeah. Hey, that was kind of like the poorly disguised question, just to short it out. All right, is Cory really the guy I think he is? And what did he get? He got like a double chocolate Oreo.
No. It was pumpkin pie.
Oh, that's pumpkin
what it was. Pie. They just announced the pumpkin pie, and
so
between that and candy cane Oreo Blizzards, I don't know. I have to work out.
Anyhow, folks, I hope you realize that neither Cory or I take ourselves very seriously. We do take our Dairy Queen really seriously. I do take putting grouse in my wife's freezer very seriously. And that's probably as much as we're going to be able to impart for life lessons today. But I thank all of you for listening. I thank Cory for being on here. Again, you can go to his website and his forum, elk101.com. And as always, you can go to randynewberg.com and you'll get all the details about our TV show on Sportsman Channel, this podcast, Randy Newberg Unfiltered, the Hunt Talk Forum, which is hunttalk.com. And starting January 1st, early January of 2016, about the time this podcast airs, you're going to see all of our old On Your Own Adventures episodes are going to be on our YouTube channel. All of our Fresh Tracks episodes to date are going to be on our YouTube channel. There's going to be some episodes that are in the can that have never been on TV. Some years we end up with more than we need. And so those are going to be there. There's going to be a lot of tips, tactics. So if you would go out, be so kind as to go out and subscribe to the Randy Newberg Hunter YouTube channel, that's going to help us. It's going to help you. And as we start doing all this whole series of elk talk and everything else, you'll get notified of where that is. So anyhow, folks, thanks for listening from wonderful Las Vegas. I say that kind of tongue in cheek. Cory, thanks a lot.
Thank you. I appreciate it.